This Egyptian goddess drank blood, hunted at night, and was so vicious that even the other gods feared her. Her name was Sekhmet, and when you read the ancient records, she doesn't sound like any other Egyptian god at all. She sounds like something else entirely. In this video, we're going back 4,000 years to uncover the truth behind Egypt's most terrifying goddess, and answer the question, was she the world's first vampire? Welcome to the mysteries of mythology. Sekhmet. Welcome back, mystics. Today we're exploring one of ancient Egypt's most complex deities, the goddess whose mythology contains elements that echo through thousands of years of storytelling about creatures of the night. The parallels are striking. The bloodlust, the transformation, the insatiable hunger that turns protector into predator. By the end of this video, you'll understand how ancient fears and divine warnings may have shaped stories that still terrify us today. But to see these connections, we need to start with the day Sekhmet almost ended the world. Picture ancient Egypt at the height of its power. Cities flourished along the Nile, temples reaching towards the heavens, humanity thriving under the benevolent gaze of the gods. But then, something changed. It began with a mistake, not by the gods, but by us. According to the myth preserved by the Book of the Heavenly Cow, humanity began to rebel. They questioned Ra's authority, whispered against the gods, and plotted to overthrow the divine order. Ra's power had weakened, his light had dimmed. Chaos crept back into the world. Violence, rebellion, and blasphemy disturbed the sacred order. Ra sought counsel from Nun, his father, the ancient waters of creation. Nun's advice was stark. Humanity had forgotten the gods, and they needed a harsh reminder. He instructed Ra to unleash his divine eye, an instrument of fury capable of restoring order. Ra obeyed, and from his eye emerged Sekhmet. She descended upon humanity as pure divine wrath. Sekhmet hunted relentlessly, tearing apart the guilty, crushing corruption, and leaving trails of blood across Egypt. Ancient texts describe her as a living plague, prowling through the cities and fields. And then, something went terribly wrong. What started as divine justice became an unstoppable massacre. The ancient texts tell us that Sekhmet waded into humanity like a lioness into a herd of gazelles. She tore through cities, leaving rivers of blood in her wake. But here's where the myth takes a disturbing turn. She began to enjoy it. The taste of blood, the act of killing, it awakened something primal in the goddess. The texts describe her as becoming drunk on slaughter, her heart rejoicing in the taste of blood. What had begun as a measured punishment became uncontrolled addiction. She wasn't just killing rebels anymore, she was killing everyone. And that's when Ra realized his mistake. His daughter was going to destroy every human being on Earth. Desperate, Ra called an emergency council of the gods. They had to stop Sekhmet. But how do you stop a goddess drunk on human blood? Their solution was brilliant. 7,000 jars of beer were mixed with red ochre and pomegranate juice to look exactly like blood. They flooded the fields where Sekhmet was hunting with this crimson mixture, and it worked. Thinking she had found an endless supply of blood, Sekhmet began to drink and drink. The alcohol did what divine intervention couldn't. It put the goddess to sleep. When she woke up, she was no longer Sekhmet the destroyer. She had become Hathor, the gentle goddess of love, music, and joy. Humanity had survived, but barely, and the gods had learned a terrifying lesson about the nature of divine power. The goddess who nearly ended the world with her uncontrollable thirst for blood was now a cautionary tale between divine power and divine madness. But perhaps most chilling of all was the idea that bloodlust, once awakened, could transform anyone, even a goddess, into something unrecognizable. Her name came from the word Sakim, meaning power, might and force. The T ending simply made it feminine. But names can be deceiving, because behind that simple etymology lay one of Egypt's most complex deities. Picture this: a woman's body, perfectly formed and draped in red linen, but crowned with the head of a lioness. She wore the sun disk of Ra and the protective cobra crown of Egyptian royalty, always holding the ankh, the symbol of life itself. In Memphis, Egypt, she formed a divine triad with Ptah, the creator god, as her husband, and their son, Nefertum, god of healing and beauty, a seemingly perfect divine family. But here's where Sekhmet becomes fascinating. She was simultaneously the god of war, destruction and plague, and the goddess of healing and medicine. Think about that paradox for a moment. The same divine being who could send plagues and decimate cities was also the one you prayed to for healing. The one who brought the disease was the one who could cure it. This wasn't contradictory to ancient Egyptians, it was logical. Who better to heal a wound than the one who knows how to inflict it? But Sekhmet's most important role was the daughter of Ra, the sun god himself. She was called the Eye of Ra. And here's the crucial detail most people miss. She didn't just represent the sun, she embodied the sun's destructive power. While other cultures saw the sun as purely life-giving, the Egyptians lived in a land where they understood the dual nature intimately. The same star that brought life to the Nile Valley could also bring killing drought. The light that guided their days could blind and burn. Sekhmet was that dangerous sun made divine. Now, her myth might sound like pure fantasy, but the Egyptians were incredibly practical people. They didn't create stories in a vacuum, they built their mythology around lived experience. And the harsh reality was this: in Egypt, the sun could kill you. While other ancient cultures saw the sun as purely life-giving, think Greek Apollo, the Egyptians understood the dual nature intimately. They lived in a land where the same sun that made the Nile Valley fertile could also bring killing drought, where the light that guided their days could blind and burn. Sekhmet embodied the terrifying aspect of solar power. She was the sun at its most dangerous, concentrated, focused, and utterly without mercy. The ancient texts call her the breath of the desert, the scorching dry winds that could kill a person in hours. She was associated with the deadly noon sun, when the heat became so intense that people would literally hide indoors, waiting for the evening to venture out again. And this is also where the archaeology becomes fascinating. Sekhmet's temples were specifically positioned to channel the harshest sunlight. Her statues were placed where the noon sun would hit them directly, creating spots of concentrated solar energy. Rituals dedicated to her were performed during the hottest parts of the day and when the sun was at its most punishing. Ancient medical papyri describe something called Sekhmet's arrows, symptoms that modern doctors recognize as heat stroke, dehydration, and diseases that spread rapidly in extreme heat. Think about what that means. To the ancient Egyptians, Sekhmet wasn't just a mythological figure, she was a very real force they encountered every single day. When temperatures soared above 50 degrees Celsius, when the desert winds turned deadly, when crops withered and people died from heat exposure, it wasn't just weather. That was Sekhmet, walking amongst them. The bloodlust in her myth wasn't literal. It was the sun's relentless consumption of life, drinking the moisture from bodies, the sap from plants, the water from the earth itself. Her uncontrollable appetite wasn't for blood, it was for life force itself. Unlike the creatures in our modern stories, there was no hiding from Sekhmet. She struck during the day, when darkness offered no refuge. The ancient Egyptians knew something that would take modern science centuries to understand, that our life-giving sun is also a massive nuclear furnace, capable of both creation and annihilation. So they did what any rational civilization would do when faced with such terrifying force. They threw a party. Imagine if your entire civilization's survival depending on throwing the ultimate party. Not just any party, a massive kingdom-wide drinking festival where literally everyone got drunk for days. Welcome to the Tech Festival, the Festival of Intoxication. Every year, usually when the Nile flood is at its peak and the heat the most dangerous, ancient Egypt would essentially shut down for one purpose: getting the goddess drunk enough to stay peaceful. We're talking about a celebration that could have lasted anywhere from several days to several weeks, involving hundreds of thousands of people, all drinking specially prepared beer and wine. Every detail was carefully planned with one goal in mind: mimic the trick that had saved humanity in the first place. The drinks were specifically coloured red, with pomegranate juice, red ochre, even henna to look just like blood. Participants would drink these crimson concoctions while musicians played hypnotic rhythms. Dancers performed increasingly wild routines, and the entire kingdom descended into controlled chaos. The idea was simple. If Sekhmet could be satisfied by drinking fake blood, perhaps she'd leave the real thing alone. But here's what makes this absolutely fascinating from a psychological perspective. The festival wasn't just about appeasing the goddess, it was about collective catharsis. An entire civilization processing their deepest fears through ritualized excess. Think about what they're really doing. They were taking the most terrifying force in the world, the destructive power of the sun, and transforming it into something they could control through community action. And to some extent, it worked. Not because it actually sedated a goddess, but because it created a massive social release valve. All that fear, all that anxiety about the heat, the drought, the very possibility of death from solar exposure, it was channeled into something positive, something that brought the community together. There was also the practical medical component that shows how sophisticated these ancient people were. The priests of Sekhmet weren't just religious leaders, they were the kingdom's doctors and surgeons. The festival was as much about public health as it was about appeasing the gods. Beer wasn't just alcohol, it was a medicine. In a world without clean water, beer was often safer to drink. And the red additives, many had genuine medical properties. The dancing and music, physical therapy and psychological treatment, the sexual liberation that was part of the festival, stress relief and community bonding. What looked like a massive party was actually one of the most sophisticated approaches to public health and social psychology in the ancient world. When the festival ended, when the hangovers wore off and normal life resumed, the participants went back to their daily lives with something crucial: a renewed sense of community and a shared understanding. They had faced their darkest fears together and survived. They had fed the goddess, and she had been satisfied. But their relationship with Sekhmet didn't end there. Sekhmet's influence didn't end when the festivals were over. Walk into any Egyptian home and you'd likely find a small shrine to Sekhmet. Not the terrifying destroyer of the myths, but Sekhmet the protector, the goddess who could ward off the very diseases she was capable of sending. This is where her dual nature becomes most apparent. The same goddess who could send a plague was the one you prayed for healing. The one who brought fever was the one who could break it. And this wasn't just a superstition. It was a sophisticated medical practice disguised as religion. The priests of Sekhmet were the kingdom's premier doctors and surgeons. They performed complex operations, set bones, treated infections, and developed some of the most advanced medical knowledge in the ancient world. Their logic was elegant. Who better to understand disease than the goddess who controlled it? Every medical procedure was a religious act. Every healing was a negotiation with Sekhmet herself. But perhaps most telling was the psychology of protection that surrounded her. The ancient Egyptians understood something profound. It's better to honor a dangerous force than ignore it. Better to acknowledge the power that could destroy you and seek its protection. By making Sekhmet part of their daily routine, by offering her small tributes and regular acknowledgement, they were doing something psychologically brilliant. They were transforming their deepest fear into their most reliable protection. The terror of the sun's power became the comfort of the sun goddess's favor. And this psychological strategy, turning fear into protection, making the dangerous into the divine, wasn't unique to Egypt. Here's where Sekhmet's story becomes a little more interesting. Thousands of miles away from Egypt, in cultures that had never heard her name, remarkably similar goddesses were emerging. The same psychological blueprint playing out across continents and centuries. In India, there was Kali, the dark goddess who literally drinks the blood of demons to prevent them from regenerating. Like Sekhmet, she was both destroyer and protector. Like Sekhmet, she had an uncontrollable appetite for blood. And like Sekhmet, she could transform from benevolent mother to terrifying warrior in an instant. In Celtic mythology, the Morrigan appeared as both a beautiful woman and a carrion crow, drinking the blood of warriors on battlefield, prophesizing doom and victory with equal ease. What are the odds that cultures separated by thousands of miles would independently develop such similar figures? They all share the same core elements: divine feminine power that can both create and destroy, an association with blood as life force, transformation between benevolent and terrifying forms, and the ability to protect through the very power that makes them dangerous. It suggests something profound about human psychology. Across cultures, we seem to need these kinds of deities, powerful, dangerous, blood-connected goddesses who embody our deepest fears and our strongest protections. And perhaps most intriguingly, they all contain elements that would later crystallize into what we now recognize as vampire mythology. The blood consumption, the transformation, the supernatural power, the aristocratic associations, the ability to both destroy and strangely protect. Which brings us back to our original question. Was Sekhmet the first vampire? So, was Sekhmet the first vampire? In my opinion, the simple answer is no. Sekhmet was never undead, never cursed, never trapped between life and death in the same way we imagine vampires. But here's where it becomes more fascinating. Every single element that defines vampire mythology appears in Sekhmet's story. The insatiable thirst for blood, the transformation from beauty to monster, a power that transcends human limitations. But most interesting of all, Sekhmet was a creature of the sun, not the darkness. While vampires are destroyed by sunlight, Sekhmet was destructive sunlight. The solar power that could kill, concentrated in divine form. What if vampires are Sekhmet's shadow? What if they represent the same primal fears, but inverted for a different climate? Think about it. Ancient Egypt feared the sun's power to kill. Modern vampires' stories fear the darkness, the night, the cold embrace of death. Two sides of the same terror. Carl Jung wrote about the collective unconscious, the idea that certain symbols and fears are shared across all human cultures, passed down through generations like psychological DNA. What if Sekhmet and goddesses like her planted the seeds? What if thousands of years of stories about blood drinking, transformation, supernatural divine beings created a template in our collective imagination? The vampire as we know it first appeared in Europe much later, but the psychological elements, the fear of uncontrolled appetite, the terror of transformation, these are ancient. Sekhmet wasn't the first vampire. She was something far more primal. And perhaps that's why vampire stories still fascinate us. They're not just about monsters in the night. They're about the same fears that made ancient Egyptians throw kingdom-wide festivals to keep a goddess satisfied. Sekhmet may have been solar, while vampires were lunar, divine, while vampires were cursed, controllable, while vampires were damned. But they both represent the same fundamental human terror. What happens when the force that should protect us becomes the force that consumes us? So no, Sekhmet wasn't the first vampire. She was something far more powerful and far more lasting. She was the first warning about what might become if we ever lost control of our appetites. And that warning echoes through every vampire story ever told. We began this journey asking whether the ancient Egyptian goddess could have been the first vampire. But sometimes the most important discoveries happen when we stop looking for the answer we expected and start seeing the truth that's been there all along. Sekhmet wasn't the first vampire. She was something far more powerful. She was the first reminder that we have a choice in how we face the things that terrify us. Think about your own life for a moment. What's your Sekhmet? What force feels so overwhelming, so beyond your control that you'd rather hide from it than face it? Maybe it's a creative project you've been putting off because you're afraid you won't be good enough. Maybe it's a relationship that scares you because of how much it could mean. Maybe it's a dream that feels too big, too impossible, too dangerous to even admit that you want it. Here's what ancient Egyptians figured out 4,000 years ago that we're still learning today. The thing that terrifies you the most might also be the thing that transforms you the most. They didn't defeat Sekhmet. They didn't banish her or lock her away. They learned to dance with her. They threw festivals in her honor. They made a party of their daily lives. They transformed that terror into celebration, their fear into community, and their helplessness into ritual and meaning. And when they did that, something miraculous happened. The destroyer became the healer. The force that could end everything became the force that could save everything. And, cheesy as it may sound, you have the same power. Whatever your Sekhmet is, whatever force in your life feels too big, too dangerous, too overwhelming, you don't have to let it control you. You don't have to hide from it. You don't have to let it remain the monster in your story. You can choose to honor it, to understand it, to find ways to work with it instead of against it. The ancient Egyptians knew something we've forgotten. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to build something beautiful in the presence of what terrifies you. Sekhmet teaches us that creation and destruction, healing and harm, love and terror can exist in the same divine breath. More importantly, she teaches us that we can choose which aspect we nurture. So here's my challenge to you. What would your life look like if you stopped running from your Sekhmet and started throwing festivals in her honor instead? What would you create if you weren't afraid of the power you might discover? Who would you become if you learned to dance with the very forces that once paralyzed you? The choice is yours, mystics. It's always been. Until the next video, stay curious.